specific section on restructuring our health system. As you know, what happens at the moment, Hospital X gets 300 or 400 million, and they proceed with their own work situation. June or July, running out of money, close down the wards, leave a very expensive equipment lying idle, operations being cancelled, waiting lists growing.
Is it fair to say then that you hope that further hospital wards won't close, but you can't say that won't happen?
When the people vote next week, assuming that Fine Gael is elected to government, we start this process in 3 phases of eliminating the waiting lists, of hospitals seeing patients as a resource and not a problem, and moving on eventually to universal health insurance, where you eliminate the 2-tier system, eliminate the private hospitals on public grounds, and let everybody be treated the same for medical packages.
Okay, and again, just briefly, back to the question. You don't want to close hospital wards, but you can't rule it out.
Well, I can't change the current structure that's there overnight, but our 5-point plan points out how that's going to be changed radically, where you're going to have a situation where, as I say, hospitals see patients as a resource. They're paid for what they do. The concept of the money following the patient will mean that you'd never have Tala Hospital again.
I have a feeling I'm not getting anywhere here. What you're saying, is it that you can't rule it out?
No, I can't predict. I can't predict for you. But what I can predict for you is that Fine Gael's 5-point plan on health will change this completely, and it's got to be done because the situation just cannot be allowed to continue as it is.
One quick question in relation to the public sector. Fine Gael has said it wants 30,000 jobs to go. Will you consider compulsory redundancies if you don't get those jobs voluntarily?
Fine Gael's plan here is to create well over 100,000 jobs, taking into account the downsizing of the numbers and the cost of delivering public services. We have stressed repeatedly we want our frontline services enhanced.
Okay, but you want 30,000 jobs to go. So
that's 18,000.
If you don't get those voluntarily, will there be compulsory redundancies?
I see absolutely no reason why we cannot save 1 in 10, why private companies do this all the time. We're talking about a relatively small adjustment over 4 years, and they will all be voluntary redundancies.
All right, your critics say that will hit frontline services.
I don't agree with my critics. The problem here, from that point of view, is if you don't do something about this, it's going to get worse. Fine Gael accepted the pay element of the Croke Park Agreement. There are conditions built in there. We had a different view about investment in infrastructure to create many more jobs. From that point of view, we want frontline services enhanced and maintained.
Okay, and could you see yourself then scrapping the Croke Park Agreement if the current problems continue? Because clearly an awful lot has changed since that was signed.
Yes, well, I would hope that the details of the Croke Park Agreement, which were signed on by public servants, that this should have happened, more quickly than now. As you are aware, the government have signed on with the IMF to revisit this issue by the 3rd quarter of this year in terms of numbers and public salaries if it doesn't measure up. And I don't want to see that happen. I have a very different view as to the fact that public servants have taken a 14% cut in income, while some bankers have had a 3% increase.
All right, can you rule out further cuts in pay then? Because we heard earlier from a woman in Bandon last night saying that she felt she'd already taken a sufficient cut.
Yes, and that woman had a very, very serious and very strong case to make, and that's why we made no bones about deliberately targeting her situation in terms of increasing the mortgage interest relief.
Are you ruling out then further pay cuts in the public service or not?
Fine Gael want the pay element of what's in there defended and protected, and the only way you can do that is by downsizing your overall cost of the delivery of your public services and downsizing the numbers through voluntary redundancy, and I think that makes eminently good sense.
You mentioned the IMF there yourself a moment ago. In relation to the bailout deal with the EU and the IMF, Fine Gael has said that you want senior bank bondholders to share in the losses as part of any renegotiation. Now, are you talking there about bank bondholders in all of the banks or just in Anglo-Irish and Irish nationwide?
Well, I think the situation here is that the stress tests on solvency and liquidity of the banks is currently underway. That's due to become available at the end of March. That's not too far away from here. So I think it's, if anything has come out of the IMF, it's the truth.
Okay, but just again on the question, because people are seeking clarity. They may have seen Michael Noonan on prime time last night and they may be confused. Are you talking about burning the bondholders, as the phrase has it, in just Anglo-Irish and Irish nationwide, or in all of the banks?
What Fine Gael have said about Anglo-Irish is that we will not commit any more monies to Anglo-Irish beyond what's already in the agreement until those bondholders are made share that burden and that responsibility.
So you're talking just about Anglo then?
In respect of the other banks, when the stress tests, insolvency and liquidity become available at the end of March, we will then know the reality of the scale of what's involved here. And I think it's an obscenity that you would, in every instance, expect the taxpayer to front up for what's happened in the banking system.
Okay,
and
so
made
you
no
are
secret.
talking then about the other banks as well, about AIB and
Yes,
Bank of Ireland.
But it may well be that Bank of Ireland, which is in a stronger position than others, may be able to move on and acquire further liquidity itself in terms of disposal of assets, and we'd like to see that move into the private end of things as quickly as possible.
Your critics say that you won't be tough enough on this, that already you're backsliding on the question of the banks, and that essentially you're winging it here. You won't be any tougher than Brian Lenihan was.
Well, you know, my own record speaks for itself in that regard, but insofar as the banks are concerned, Fine Gael have made it perfectly clear that burden sharing is something that we've been talking about for quite some time. And in fact, had the government taken our view 2.5 years ago, we certainly wouldn't be in the scale of the mess that we're in now in relation to banks. And I made that perfectly clear when I spoke to Commission President Barroso and indeed Chancellor Merkel about the challenge that faces us here. We are able to deal with difficulty, with some challenge in respect of our own national economic problems, but we do need and we'll have to look for assistance in cooperation with our European colleagues to sort out the costs of the bank structure contained in the deal and the extent of the interest rate, which is penal.
All right, just one final question then in relation to all of that. I'm sure you're aware that Goodbody Stockbrokers put out a report last week. Their chief economist Dermot O'Leary talking about the amount of bank debt in Ireland that the public has had to take on, and he said that we either tackle bank debt now or we're going to have to tackle sovereign debt down the road. Is there a danger, do you think, that the country's debt burden will become just too much to bear and that we could be in further serious trouble down the road?
Well, we are in serious trouble. And that's the reason that Fine Gael's plan sets out a strategic way, a costed way to sort this out. We're never going to deal with this problem until we get our people working.
All right, but is there ever a situation, could you ever countenance a situation where Ireland would say we're going to have to renegotiate not just our bank debt but also our sovereign debt because we can't take this?
Ireland has always paid its way and will continue to pay its way. I believe we can deal with some difficulty and with some assistance with this bank challenge, which is enormous. We should never be here. 100 billion gone in there already through incompetence, lack of regulation and lack of oversight.
But you're saying no default then on sovereign debt, no matter what happens?
Absolutely not. As far as I'm concerned, this country has had a proud status and a proud reputation. We have always paid our way. Europe knows that what we're doing already, and the austerity programme that's here, the pain and the suffering and the agony in many cases that people are taking, they understand that. But we need some assistance in respect of this bank structure and the interest rate, and that's why if we're elected on this day week, we will be out to Brussels to speak to our colleagues there, look for that sense of cooperation. We cannot do that element of it on our own. Our people have measured up before, but this is a crushing burden, but it can be solved.
Okay, Enda Kenny, leader of Fine Gael, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in Cork this morning. The time now on Morning Ireland, 28 minutes